Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me, as always, David Griscom. David, hello.
Hey, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing well. And joining us from the UK this evening, afternoon for us, is Heather Mendick. Heather is an activist and ex-Labour member. But before we get to that, we wanted to talk to Heather about what's going on with Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. We've been having our hands full with the Democrat problems here in the U.S., but it seems like Labour is also going through quite a bit of, perplexing and self-defeating or left-defeating, maybe we should say, actions. Jeremy Corbyn, I saw the news he was going to be disallowed to run as an MP in the coming elections. Can you just give us, and take your time, we have time, is this over this anti-Semitism stuff? Can you just give us a chronology of what the accusations against Corbyn has been here and why Starmer has acted this way?
So I can't give the full chronology because it's insane, right? But I can tell you the kind of pivotal issue that this is around. So there's a kind of statutory body in the UK called the EHRC, which is the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, and they are really a Tory-front organisation, but they appear to be neutral, and they're in charge of implementing and monitoring equalities legislation. They decided to do an investigation of the Labour Party. This is obviously not a neutral decision. The only political party they've ever investigated before is the British National Party, which is a very racist far-right party. And they did it because of the whole kind of narrative that's been created around Labour Party anti-Semitism. And the report, which I haven't read, I can't bear to read it, but I've read extracts. Essentially, it found that there was breaches of the law. And it did that through a kind of technicality. So it needed to find breaches of the law because it was politically necessary to label the Labour Party as having broken the law. So they had to kind of cook up some explanation. And they said that the problem was that the leader and the leader's office had investigated in complaints of anti-Semitism, and that should have rightfully been just something that the party took care of. There should have been division there. This was something which the whole of the media had been hounding Jeremy to do. And actually the complaints team, the investigations team, asked for support from the leader's office because there were changes of staff. There was a huge number of complaints. It was very controversial. So again, this shouldn't be problematic. And this is something which Keir Starmer has done since then. He's really, really heavy-handedly got involved in the investigations process, but the HRC don't seem to care anymore. So this report happened. It came out. And on the day it came out, Jeremy Corbyn issued a statement. It was talking about what happened under his watch, so he felt he should do that. And in his statement, he accepted the findings of the report in full, but he said that undoubtedly anti-Semitism had been exaggerated, overstated, I can't remember the exact phrasing, by the media and by his political enemies. And that was used as a pretext to suspend Jeremy Corbyn's membership of the Labour Party. That pretext didn't hold. He was reinstated. But Keir Starmer then removed the whip from him. So that technically means he's not part of the parliamentary Labour Party. So he's been sitting as an independent MP in Parliament ever since then. Now, I think some people thought he might get the whip back, that he might be allowed to stand. I think after a short period of time, it was obvious to a lot of us that was never going to happen. But he stated this week, he used the EHRC taking the party out of kind of monitoring processes as a reason to hammer the left. And one of the ways of hammering the left is to hammer Jeremy Corbyn because of the symbolism of that. And he said he's never going to be allowed to stand. And obviously that's interfering in disciplinary processes, but no one cares because they're all on Starmer's side and they're all against Jeremy in the media and so on. So that's the pretext. Of course, it goes way back before that to the whole kind of issue of the way in which a narrative was created about anti-Semitism in Labour.
Yeah, and I just want to talk about that. That we can't, I think the American media is a little bit better at acknowledging that this sort of weaponization takes place, and it's actually, it's not as good at acknowledging it as I would like it, but that seems like a matter of fact. I have no problem. I'm easily saying that like anti-Semitism is pervasive in culture, in the Western Anglosphere culture. Like David and I just started tried to post on a new platform the other day, and the first comments were like anti-Semitic stuff. So like this is a problem widely, but when it gets sort of specifically aimed at the left, and particularly people who are critical of Israel, it's just a clear problem with the discourse and political weapon. Like that to me, like that seems like Corbyn, by like he can't even if he wanted to, it's a disservice, and everybody on the left who's acting like that doesn't exist is doing a disservice to people understanding like the state of politics.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's got kind of really ridiculous in the UK because of the way it was used in the Labour Party, and because a lot of people who came into the movement through Jeremy Corbyn didn't have a lot of experience in the Palestine solidarity movement, hadn't seen this happen before. As soon as they heard Jewish people saying, look, we're really uncomfortable in the Labour Party, they started to feel like maybe there's something going on, even though there wasn't any experience that they had necessarily they could connect with. They thought, oh, well, maybe we should like take this seriously. And as soon as that process started, a lot of people went down a path that was really problematic, where they couldn't come back from it, where they'd started to accept that there was some truth in it. And that has happened all across, some very prominent left-wing people, like Momentum went down that path. Momentum went down the path of saying, Momentum is the organisation which was set up to have Corbyn's back, because you get a leader of the Labour Party who is left-wing and you've got to have a movement behind him, otherwise everything's going to get screwed up very quickly. So Momentum came into being. But when the anti-Semitism thing hit, they said we can walk and chew gum at the same time was the approach. I don't know which was walking, which was chewing gum, but one was saying that anti-Semitism has been weaponized and the other was tackling anti-Semitism on the left. What happened was they didn't really talk about the weaponization at all. They didn't give people political strategies for dealing with that, political understanding, political education to do that, because there was a kind of sense that if they did that, they'd maybe be indulging anti-Semitism. There was a confusion around that, I think. And they thought that if they tackled anti-Semitism on the left, it would be okay. But actually what they ended up doing was getting sucked into all of these accusations. There were literally organisations churning out hundreds of accusations, sometimes thousands, that were being sent in to the Labour Party. Some of which, I mean, one MP, she put in 200. 180 of these related to non-Labour Party members. So the party had to go through, trawl through, find the 20 that related, then investigate. And of course, we then got definitions of anti-Semitism which deliberately were intended to conflate criticism of Israel, criticism of Zionism with anti-Semitism. At that point, we kind of lost the battle. At that point, the crucial thing was, if you denied there was a problem, you were anti-Semitic because of that denial.
Now, was that the EHRC, or was that another body that was doing that conflating of the definition between criticism of Israel and also just like anti-Semitism against Jewish people themselves?
This is a lot of different groups have been doing this. Right. So that's been coming at us from all directions. So Jewish communal bodies have been doing that, and there's been a lot of pressure, and the government indeed has put a lot of pressure on universities now to accept this International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. Right. With all the examples, this has become a kind of obsession in this country, the IHRA definition. And our council's adopted it, my local council, local government. So the pressure is big coming on to accept this. And as soon as you accept that, that becomes a way of kind of, even though the definition says, these examples may or may not be anti-Semitism, that's never how it's treated. If you say Israel is a racist endeavor, then you are ipso facto anti-Semitic, for example. Right,
which, I mean, John Kerry himself said in 2016 that like the settlements show that this is moving towards a one-state situation, and it can either be Jewish or it can be democratic. It cannot be both. And there's an effort by the Israel lobby to infantilize everyone's understanding of that just stark reality. David, I don't know if you had some. Heather, could you just outline your own expulsion from the Labour Party too? And we'll share the video where you go into a little bit more detail from your YouTube page. But just to describe for folks that, because your experience and the sort of left experience here, it's like if when Ilhan was criticized by Pelosi for the "all about the Benjamins" comment.
Yeah.
And then all like Pelosi's like, yeah, you guys got to go. Actually, instead of just letting that undermine their actual good agenda that they were supposedly going to do alongside the squad, and that never went anywhere because of that. So yeah, just describe your own experience.
Yeah, so I was really involved in the Labour Party 2015 to 2019, and in 2017 I became the local party secretary. Now that is not a glamorous role, it's like a big admin role and it's unpaid, but it's kind of pivotal. You have access to data, you control how the meetings run, and you kind of organise, and I became kind of an organiser on the left as well prior to that and going on. And so that kind of triggered a lot of the people in the local party who hate Jeremy Corbyn and saw all of us as kind of an incarnation of evil, irregardless of us as individuals. And so I think I stepped down as secretary following the 2019 general election. I thought, I'm going under the radar now, they won't bother with me. A lot of people I knew who'd stayed as secretaries did get suspended pretty quick. But then something happened locally in my branch, and I think they just got a bit spiteful and phoned up their mates in complaints. I think a lot of it happens like that. So people locally, they scour through your social media, they find things that they think look dodgy, they send them into the complaints department, and you get a notice of investigation. It's all very Kafkaesque. So I got, I think, something like 15 tweets that I had to respond to. I really didn't want to go to actually get into their framework of actually responding, because the whole thing is, we've got this stuff. You might be guilty, you might not be guilty, but can you please make yourself more guilty by replying to these charges? So I didn't want to do that. So I kind of just put out a statement. Most of the charges against me didn't relate, none of them related to Israel at that stage, which is interesting. They all related to me saying that anti-Semitism has been weaponized against the left and used as a smear. So I wrote a statement about that, and I thought, oh, that's fine. And I was planning to leave the Labour Party in November of not last year, 2021, because we'd have got through local selections. And then I got a second notice of investigation with all the same stuff as the one before, except they added on, you shouldn't have told anybody the last one. You shouldn't have gone public with it. And then I was like, well, I might as well stick around now. I'll make a video and I'll stick around to try and get the results. So I was paying my membership for like 13 months just to be investigated, just in the hope that they actually came to a resolution. They eventually came to a resolution, and their decision was that you must be excluded if you say that anti-Semitism has been weaponized against the left.
Right. So not broadly like anti-Semitism, but like that you said that, and that's bad to say, even though
that's denialism. There's a whole word for it now. It's denialism.
That's denialism.
Yeah. Wow. So I'm guilty of denialism. Yeah. It's insane.
Right. So if you say that's happening, if I say Democratic majority for Israel is spending an awful lot in Democratic primaries on behalf of anti-left candidates, that's me being basically a global warming denier, I guess.
Well, I mean, could you talk a little bit? I mean, because I think at this point it's incredibly obvious. The target of this is to sort of clean house and push out people who supported Corbyn in the Labour Party. But, I mean, this is, again, I think intentional, but ironically, like a lot of Jewish members have been sort of targeted by this as well. People who, advocate for Palestinian human rights, correct?
Yeah. I mean, so if you're Jewish and on the left, you're much more likely to be disciplined. I think that's for two reasons. One is that you probably spent the Corbyn years speaking out more because, like, we feel more entitled to speak about Jewish identity and to say something. I think a lot of people were just very confused and didn't say a lot. So we've got more stuff in our social media, I guess, that can be latched onto. But also, I think it's just much more challenging if you have Jewish people who are not saying what or the majority of Jewish people saying, and not saying what the dominant narrative is. So in that sense, those people get attacked. And there's a group called Jewish Voice for Labour, who their whole executive committee has been taken through some kind of disciplinary action. And it was really bizarre this week because they were actually asking members of the Jewish Labour Movement is the right-wing Jewish organisation within the Labour Party, which is Zionist, explicitly so. And they were asking members on the media of the Jewish Labour Movement, well, what do you think about Jewish Voice for Labour? And they were just saying, oh, they should just leave. They just, do they really want to be in this party? And they were just essentially excluding them. And if anyone had said that about Jewish Labour Movement, and said these people support apartheid, they should just consider whether they belong in a Labour Party, all hell would have broken loose, right? The media would have been like screaming about how anti-Semitic everyone was. But you do it to Jewish Voice for Labour and it's like, well, whatever. It's really weird. The whole thing is so disturbingly strange that it's really hard to talk about it because it just seems like weird, absurd, right?
Yeah. How much of this is your sense? Because one thing we try to disentangle here is, especially with the sort of involvement in Democratic primaries, is how much of this is specifically about Israel, and how much of this is like that issue as like a anti-left sort of opportunity, and it's weird how that's played because it's also like the candidates DMFI was giving to weren't even bringing up Israel often. And we're just doing.
They were running campaigns, just like, sorry not to cut you off, but just being explicit. They were running campaign ads that again had like nothing to do with Israel Palestine. They were literally things like, oh, this candidate is a bad Democrat, or right, just like on completely other issues. Sorry.
Yeah, I've tried to disentangle that. I think it's really difficult. I think the different motivations for different groups. Mm-hmm. So this is a kind of, they obviously tried other smears against Jeremy Corbyn before they really focused on anti-Semitism. And you can see that with Sanders movement and the use of smears there. And I think the anti-Semitism one was really effective because there were actors who were using it. There was groups in the Jewish community who were using it against the Palestine Solidarity movement and internally within the Jewish community to exclude people on the left of the Jewish community, partly for their Palestine solidarity, but also partly because of kind of class politics of the Jewish community. And so that was kind of ready-made. And then all these kind of horrible centrist types in Labour Party latched onto it and started using it really kind of opportunistically, I think. And so for them, the primary reason is to destroy the left. And there are kind of really weird things coming up now where there have been attempts to label anti-capitalism and any kind of form of anti-capitalist politics as de facto anti-Semitic.
That to me, that sounds extremely anti-Semitic. You know what I mean? Like,
as if the Israel stuff wasn't anti-Semitic enough.
Absolutely, yeah. To imply that like Israel represents all Jewish people, and Lord in heaven. I mean, that's next level stuff.
And that's something
we
that
got next level stuff. Yeah.
That's something that oligarchy is interested in. I mean, Nancy MacLean's book about the Koch brothers, they want to conflate sort of constitutional protections of minority groups. They want to insert capitalists as like one of those minority groups that you can't agitate against. So, that's horrible. And so let's talk about like what the left does now, because it seems like the parties in Starmer's making the decision for you guys. Like whereas like we in America we're like, well, let's still like try this, and we're stymied here, but they're at least working with Ilhan in this way. Like Starmer's just like, nah, you're done.
Yeah, so I think the situation is if Bernie had won the nomination. It's more comparable to our situation. Right. So a bit more, because Jeremy did win the leadership election, and that gave a certain fear. And even then in 2015, the fear wasn't as great as in 2017. As soon as we started to gain votes, as soon as we got a bit close to winning, then everything intensified. Like the summer after 2017, the 2017 generation, the 2018 summer was filled every single day with something about anti-Semitism, all over the newspapers, all over the television news. So yeah, I think it's a different situation for us because like we had a little bit of success, not a lot, but a little bit more success. And so the pushback has to be greater. So there's a real kind of really vindictive approach now. And I think there's no leadership at all from people who are comparable to Ilhan and the squad, who are the Socialist Campaign Group in Parliament. They haven't said anything collectively about what's going on. And I think that is because they're terrified of losing their jobs.
And I think if you don't mind, zooming out a little bit to remind like our American listeners, what happened with the Corbyn movement was incredibly historic, right? You took a party, you expanded the base, like the amount of members in it, which people surprisingly, wow, when you started to ask them about things, oh no, they did like things going in a more left-wing direction than like the more neoliberal corporate style Blairism. There was a real tremendous amount of success in like mobilizing the public into the Labour Party. And like, this is just me sent, from across the ocean looking at it. It's like, it's very clear though, that what Starmer is trying to establish right now is that the Labour Party will never be open to that kind of public takeover. Like that's what he's trying to cement right now. That's off the table for the Labour Party under Starmer, at least.
Yes, I think he's trying to cut it off forever. I think he's the one who's in place. He was the only person who could have won that leadership election who would then do this kind of work, because he'd stayed in Jeremy Corbyn's cabinet. Not the whole time. He left the summer of the attempt to topple Jeremy Corbyn, but he came back. And so people in the membership who hadn't been paying close attention, it was a very big party. So we had about a couple 100,000 members at the beginning of Corbyn's time, and by the end, over 500,000. And so most people are involved day to day in the party. They may be canvassing elections, but they're not doing much else. And so having seen Keir Starmer, and also having seen the destruction of Jeremy Corbyn in the media and not wanted to go back to that, not wanted to repeat that with the left-wing candidate for leadership, people thought, oh, well, Keir Starmer's promising left-wing stuff and it looks like he'll get an easier ride from the media, so we'll go with him. So he was the only candidate who could have won and then do what he's doing now, which is give the party back to the right for as long as possible. And rule changes have happened, which are very difficult to overturn, which make it very hard to get, almost impossible to get even a left-wing candidate on the ballot next time as a leadership election.
And also just, we had Daniel Finn on the program a couple years back once this investigation first started, and we were talking about what we were just talking about, the conflation of criticizing Israel with anti-Semitism, but two, one thing that I think a lot of people in the U.S. might have not caught was that it was also revealed that there were officials inside of the Labour Party who are actively trying to crash the 2017 campaign. Were actively campaigning against Corbyn, giving them false information, basically, trying to misdirect the Corbyn campaign, because they were afraid that in 2017 that Labour, the party that they were ostensibly members of, might actually win the election. And, again, for folks in the US who might not remember, 2017 was close. So this kind of messing around really had tremendous consequences. And it just shows that there's a shift in membership, but there were so many in the actual, in positions of power in the party who really just wanted nothing to do with Corbyn, wanted to see him and this movement fail.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to compare how quickly Keir Starmer has just taken control of all levers of the party compared to how long it took Jeremy Corbyn to get tentative control of any levers of the party. That whole of the staff was just stacked with right-wingers, mostly Blairites. And there are lots of different versions of right-wingers, but I think a lot of them were just traditional Blairites. People who saw, apparently, this is a story from Alex Nunn's book about Corbyn's leadership election, that on the day after Jeremy Corbyn was elected, they all wore black at headquarters in mourning for the party they'd lost. There's also the stories about how they were jubilantly searching for left-wingers to exclude and suspend in the summer of 2016 when there was an election, a second election, because they tried to topple Jeremy Corbyn. And they called it trot hunting. And apparently they rang a bell every time they managed to find someone who they could get rid of. The whole thing is crazy to imagine. And the sabotage in every single part of the party. So among councillors as well, dominated by the right of the party, that's local government. You go up to the MPs, again, dominated by the right wing. It was very easy to get a vote of no confidence through the MPs because they never started with any confidence in Jeremy. And they never gained any. So a couple of people, I think, gained a little bit, but generally they started with none, they ended with none, and that was how it worked. And so the Labour Party as an institution, it's part of the establishment, it's the official opposition. And I think a lot of us didn't really understand that. And we all, of course, went into local parties where we were facing similar kinds of opposition, really. People who just didn't want us there, people who acted weird around us, people who organised against us, people who we were having to sit in meetings with, who hated our politics. It was a weird existential experience, among other things.
I'm sure.
And I'm glad you brought up that comparison to like if Bernie won, because I think like when Bernie would say things like we're gonna need a movement, it's that the work is gonna start there. Like that, what Corbyn's experience with the party is exactly like what Bernie is, I think, like was talking about there. And I also get the media, British media. I lost a lot of respect for journalists that I enjoyed reading during like the financial crisis or the Iraq war, or even like some comedian type folks.
Yeah, a lot of comedians.
I couldn't believe it. I'm like, you guys, what's going on here? Everyone's bad on this issue. I'm trying to just laugh here. Just talk about how that must have been insane, and I, like to deal with where the entire like press and media establishment is also like joining with this sort of I think project to smear the left.
Yeah, it was like a revelation to a lot of us. I think you kind of go on thinking a lot of these comedians are kind of anti-establishment, and then they see what's anti-establishment, and they react. And I realised we all realised they were actually part of the establishment. And I learned a lot about how the British establishment works. These kind of connections that are largely invisible, but are clearly there. People going to the same parties, people who come from the same schools, people who hang out together. Our society is just horrific. And there's some actors who I can't watch anymore because they were so active in smearing Corbyn. And the weird thing is how much attention the media have given to really people who know nothing about anti-Semitism, just because they're kind of minor celebrities and they're on the right side of this issue for the media. I mean, the woman who did the sums, the maths in Countdown, and who'd been on which is a kind of game show, and she'd been on the you have Dancing with the Stars, don't you? We have it's got a different name, but it's the same show. She'd been on that. She was rubbish, but she kind of got together with her partner on that, and suddenly she's coming up telling everyone she's Jewish and how horrific Corbyn is and all this stuff. And David Baddiel, a failed comedian who actually did blackface as part of his comedy.
The David Baddiel, I didn't hear about this, but just to cut in, David Baddiel did a super racist, downright harassment sort of caricature of a football player in the 90s. That is like, bro, can you just take a seat for a little bit?
I mean, he's on record as making horrifically sexist jokes. He's on record as making anti-Gypsy Roma traveller jokes, but he is now the guru on not just anti-Semitism, on anti-racism somehow. It's so perverse that it's really hard to know how you take on like that, because he was an interviewee on Holocaust Memorial Day here. He was like one of the news channel's interviewees. It was bizarre.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing that's on top of just like the attacks on Corbyn, and like, just remind folks, like, Corbyn's still out there. Corbyn's still doing, amazing stuff.
He was here recently.
He was just in the U.S., advocating for the U.S. not to torture Julian Assange. And like, so he's still out there fighting. But this is a moment in the UK where by any, in any other context, you would expect the Labour Party to be really active in, I don't know, call me old fashioned, in the labor struggles that we're seeing across the country. And you see Keir Starmer basically telling people, I mean, this was a few months back, but telling people that if they showed solidarity with the RMT strikes, that they would be disciplined by the party. And again, like, not to be too literal about this, but this is the goddamn Labour Party. And you have the leaders telling people you can't show solidarity with labor action in the country.
Yeah. I mean, it was standing on picket lines was not something he allowed the shadow cabinet to do. Yeah. So that's the kind of inner circle of people in charge of different areas. If you're on the back benches, you could get away with standing on picket lines as long as you weren't too in your face about it. one person who was more in your face about it got in trouble. The Labour Party has a complicated relationship with organised labour all the way through. And in fact, the labour unions, I mean, you probably have this in the US, that you have some labour unions that are more radical and some labour unions that are much more establishment and seeking to kind of ally much more with management and we have that. And obviously those trade unionists and those trade unions are much more aligned with the Starmer project than with Corbyn. But actually the unions had moved to the left considerably in this country, and that was part of the reason why Jeremy Corbyn was able to win, because he was able to get endorsement of the two key unions, Unite and Unison. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what Starmer would do in charge. I mean, Tony Blair didn't reverse any of the Tories' anti-union legislation at all, which meant that as soon as the Tory government came in, they could build on that and push worse and worse anti-union legislation. So Starmer has said that he would pull back on some of that, but I don't know whether he would. Right. And I think the relationship between the Labour Party and the unions is really different than the Democratic Party and the unions. And that's probably important for people to understand, that these unions are affiliated, some of them are affiliated to the Labour Party and have certain rights within the rules of the Labour Party at conference and so on, and places on committees. And so there's kind of compromises that get done through that, which I don't understand, and I'm not going to pretend that I do.
No, I think it's also just, while we're just talking about this stuff too, for the American audience, that like the Labour Party operates in a very different way, just like its structure is different from the Democratic Party. What you basically do is, if you live in a state like New York, you have to register as a Democrat so you can vote in a primary. That typically is like the extent of your involvement with them. In a state like Texas, where it's an open primary, you don't even have to do that, and you don't pay dues. You're not really like a member of the party in like a full sense that like is more typical in the UK or in Europe. So when people are saying that like we're leaving the Labour Party, it's oftentimes like a little bit different from somebody else who's saying, I will never vote for a Democrat ever again. Right. Right. It's saying like, I'm not giving my money. I'm not giving my time. I'm not giving my participation to a party that doesn't share my values, a party that wants to see my movement fail and, be defeated. Right. So I think it's just important cross-cultural understanding there that sometimes Americans, I don't think, realize the difference in the party structure. But I was wondering, if you don't mind, I mean, because it's been interesting, watching, if you could give like a sense of people who we might have considered maybe, in 2017 to be very much, standing with Corbyn or standing near Corbyn on these things, to give people a sense of maybe some of the maybe betrayals or backturnings or anything like that have been particularly surprising or disheartening for folks. I'm not expecting you to do them all, but like, it's interesting because I feel like the bench of folks that we're friendly with in the US socialist movement, in the UK socialist movement, like that list has been trimmed pretty significantly in the past couple of years.
Yeah, it's been a kind of test, hasn't it, for people? Yeah. I think, like, can you hold even though it's tough? And the betrayals have been like different types of betrayals. So I've been really disappointed with some of the left media. So Owen Jones, who's quite a well-known figure, probably one of my most prominent and on TV a lot left journalists. In summer 2016, when we were really under attack, because that was the summer when they tried to topple Corbyn, we had to have another leadership election, and they were attempting to get Jeremy Corbyn to actually stand down without a leadership election and to not be on the ballot. They were trying to use legal mechanisms to get him off the ballot. All he did was spend that summer writing articles about things the left needed to address, questions the left needed to answer. And it was really bizarre because he'd written a book on the establishment. Literally, he wrote the book, The Establishment. And he couldn't see this as the establishment working. And I found him very frustrating, really, as a figure. And then Navarro Media is another kind of left-wing news outlet. And I'd say they're better than Owen Jones on this, but they very much, I think they were trying to come up with the kind of same momentum compromise that walk and chew gum, but ended up just really talking about anti-Semitism on the left. And there were figures from that who, very left-wing, very strongly with Corbyn, who went on TV and said, I think anti-Semitism is endemic in the Labour Party. And I think that was a real betrayal. I still feel that as a betrayal of us. And there was a feeling that these people felt like they were kind of above the movement a bit. And they were looking at us and analysing us and telling us what was wrong with us, rather than kind of standing with the grassroots. I mean, obviously there's people locally where you see people wavering, and when you see things get tough and then people waver in different ways. When people get accused of anti-Semitism, sometimes people who've been solid really struggle with that and really waver and can't hold the line.
I mean, I remember myself like 20 years old, I'm from North Dakota. I don't really have a whole lot of experience on these issues, and like accusations of anti-Semitism when it came to talking about Israel being very common. And it wasn't until I read like Tony Jute, some works by him, and realizing like, oh, actually, there's a problem here that can be elaborated without you being anti-Semitic. But like, we have a culture and a media that's set up to not be forthright about that. I'm curious how. Oh, go ahead, David.
No. Keep going, Matt.
I just wanted to ask, like, where are activists, like, where are your heads at as far as like what the steps go forward? Like, has Corbyn issued any sort of idea of what the next thing is? Does the left that was standing with him, or like, okay, like what in the context of like a parliamentary system, like third parties, I take it are generally more, practical. Like, I'm just curious where the activists' heads are at.
I think it's all splintered a lot, actually, and there's a lot of kind of bitterness there. So I think some people are traumatized by it to a great or less extent. I think we're all traumatized by it a little bit. And some people just want revenge. They don't want to be involved in politics. They just want everyone who trashed our movement to, heads on spikes, pretty much, which I have some sympathy for, but it's just too nihilistic, I think, for me. There's some people who have thrown themselves into other parties. So some people have joined the Green Party. Third parties are a real struggle here because we have a first past the post, not a proportional voting system. But the Greens have got one member of parliament. They've got a significant number of councillors, and they are a nationwide party. And so some people have gone for them. There's some attempts to start up new left parties or revive old left parties, which are not having much success, very small. Whether they have great success later on, I don't know. Then there are people who are persistently going to stay in the Labour Party. Some people who were in it already. It is the party of organised labour. It has those affiliations. For a lot of people, that is the primary significant important thing about the party. It is the site of struggle for a lot of people. They believe it's necessary to be in. So there's a lot of people who are sticking around. There's people who made friends in the Labour Party, some of whom became councillors, some of whom just became part of their life, who are reluctant to go and are sticking around. There's people like me who are kind of more getting involved in smaller local campaigns. So I do a housing campaign locally a lot now. People are getting more involved in trade unions. As you said, there's a really important trade union struggles. We're having a winter of strikes in lots and lots of industries, and that's been really good and revived a lot of people. So there's all of that going on. There's lots of campaigns, small issue campaigns. There's other organisations like the People's Assembly, which is an anti-austerity group, which is also nationwide, that people have got involved in. But I would say a lot of people have just disappeared from politics. I think it is pretty devastating. It does feel like we really tried and we got such pushback that there's a question of like, well, what do you need to do and how can we do it? Jeremy himself is very much someone, I think, who believes in staying in the Labour Party. I don't think he'll stand as an independent candidate against Labour, because that's what it would mean. There'll be a Labour candidate in his local area and there'd be him. And I don't think he will do that.
That reminds me a little bit of Bernie too. Like I think these are guys who understand the maybe borderline futility of certain situations, but also like they're not going to be the ones who decide to like take out the can of gasoline.
Yeah, I mean they're both older people now as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
and they've both had a hard time.
Yeah,
it's a long
I don't think we should
project,
expect it of them either. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think we should either. And I think it's really rough. I mean, if Jeremy did stand, as a candidate without being in the Labour Party, anybody who said anything in support of him would get immediately excluded from Labour Party. So his old comrades in Parliament wouldn't be able to even send a tweet wishing him luck.
Could you talk a bit? I mean, I don't think this is too surprising, but Corbyn still holds tremendous support in his district, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, my friend, one of my good buddies lives in London. He lives near Corbyn's district, and he says, he'll go to bars and there'll be a picture of Corbyn up on the wall. Like he's still a very popular figure for the people that he's been serving for years and years and years. And like, not to be a one note guy, but like this is one of those things where like from so many of the fights that we're having, it's like a simple question of democracy where, the people in Corbyn's district aren't the ones who are saying we're done with Corbyn. We want this to end. It's Keir Starmer. Somebody, I mean, how many times have people in the United Kingdom been able to vote on Starmer? Right? He, comes from a very small area. Right? He hasn't had like a national campaign that sort of cemented him. He's somebody who won an internal election. And yeah, I think to deny the people of Corbyn's district their ability to decide whether or not they want to stick with him or not is pretty nasty and pretty undemocratic.
Yeah, I mean, he would say, well, Jeremy Corbyn can stand as an independent. People can vote for him. And I think it obviously is undemocratic. Totally agree with you. But I think that within the Labour Party and within all the left organisations, because of what we've been through, there's these processes called due diligence, which is that we don't just let anyone stand, we check up on them first. And that kind of makes sense because there's been a lot of attacks on candidates in the media. They'll trawl through social media, they'll find anything, and they'll get these people just humiliated in public, often having to step down. That's happened repeatedly. So I don't think I'm against due diligence in context of the Labour Party. The question is whether Corbyn should pass or fail the due diligence test. And obviously we think he should pass. But if you buy the argument that he presided over a horrific wave of anti-Semitism movement that is endemically anti-Semitic, he probably shouldn't. Within that logic, it would be very irresponsible to let him represent the Labour Party in an election. So that I think the democracy argument kind of sidesteps the main issue, which we have to have the argument about whether what happened was about anti-Semitism or was about something else. And people don't want to have that argument. This is the reason why, for example, Momentum is making a democracy argument, because they don't want to have the argument about anti-Semitism because of where we've got to with it, because they'll endure a horrific campaign against them if they do.
Well, Heather Mendick, you can follow Heather at Helen SC Legal on Twitter. Heather, thank you so much for doing this. I wish it was under better circumstances and not,
yeah, indeed.
staring into the abyss with us from across the pond. I appreciate it.
No, it's really nice to talk to you. It's nice that you're giving us the shoe space in the US. It's really important.
Of course.
Well, I mean, partially out of self-preservation too, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, you'll get it soon. Well, and I think only Bernie. Well, I think Bernie being Jewish helped a bit, didn't it? And also,
but they still tried it with him. It just didn't stick as well.
And it's also he's also doesn't take an ultra position. He's like, let's make this two-state solution work. Like, if you're not going to accept that from a senator, I mean, I guess obviously him being Jewish helps too. But man.
I mean, again, like, anyway, we're wrapping up, but like, it's also like, again, it's different structures. It's like, Bernie's like associated with the Democratic Party. He, they can't come at him in the same way that they can with Corbyn in Labor.
Yeah. But Heather, thank you so much. And we'll do this hopefully again, maybe have some better news to talk about, or Keir Starmer, Prime Minister or something like that.
Oh my God, yeah. That'll be really interesting.
Thanks, Heather.